As Canada reaches the halfway point in its federal election campaign, a new poll reveals a growing sense of political disconnection among voters. According to research from the Angus Reid Institute conducted in partnership with think tank Cardus, 63% of Canadians say it's impossible for people like them to influence political decisions that affect their lives. The findings, based on surveys of 5,000 people in both Canada and the United States, show that Canadians feel slightly more powerless than their American counterparts. Ray Pennings, Executive Vice-President of Cardus, warns that these sentiments could have serious consequences, and he joins us now to discuss. Ray, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what initially prompted you to explore feelings of political powerlessness in Canada and the United States?
So this is Cardus's 25th anniversary, and as part of our projects this year, we actually did a poll of 10,000, 5,000 Americans and 5,000 Canadians. So that gives us much greater numerical power to look into subgroups. And we will be analyzing and releasing throughout the year various aspects of the poll, but the poll doesn't look just at politics. It looks at citizenry and civic engagement, everything from engagement in the arts to religious engagement, community engagement, and political engagement is part of the larger package. So we didn't really seek out to look at powerlessness per se, but we looked at why do people get involved in various public institutions, what drives, what beliefs and expectations drive those practices, and how satisfied are they with the outcome. So it's part of a larger question. That said, we're in the middle of an election campaign. We had these results, so it seemed prudent to put these results in a way that might provoke some discussion.
And when you saw the results, were you surprised by the high percentage of Canadians who are feeling this way compared to Americans?
Yeah, the loss of trust in institutions has been well documented for the last decade, and that's true of all institutions. It is particularly surprising, though, to see the sense of helplessness that people are feeling, and I would say a lack of certainty or clarity in terms of how to meaningfully respond and shape. I get the sense that a lot of Canadians are actively engaged. There is some correlation with the more active you are, the less cynical or distrustful, but that's not true for all groups either. The results are mixed. So I look forward to digging into these results to find out what exactly are the differences between those whose activity leads them to confidence and those activity leads them to cynicism. But when you take the numbers all together, there is certainly a higher level of feeling of a lack of agency, if you will, among voters than I expected.
And how big of an impact, if any, do you think that Donald Trump has on these feelings for people from both countries?
I think it's huge. I think, if you just, the change in the polls from where we were prior to the election of Donald Trump to where we are today has been well documented. Obviously, that's also tied domestically to a change in the leadership of the Liberal Party and how those come together. But what is interesting in this campaign is that, and I don't blame the Liberals. If I were the Liberal campaign manager, I would do exactly the same thing. They have taken ideas out of the equation and have focused the election entirely on leadership competency to deal with Donald Trump, making that the single ballot question. Whether it's the carbon tax, capital gains, housing, building, energy infrastructure, whatever conservative platform ideas were in the window, the Liberals basically borrowed it and, with a few tweaks, made it their own, eliminating policy and idea differentiation and really focused on purely holding on to power in terms of dealing with that. I think that causes cynicism on the part of Canadians, because it looks increasingly and somewhat transparently that this is about holding on to power. And when Canadians think of their own agency in election, they actually think of giving a mandate for a particular set of ideas, but that opportunity is basically even being taken away from them in terms of how they can cast their ballot.
Now, looking at the poll more specifically, it mentioned that men aged 35 to 54 in Canada feel especially powerless. Why do you think this is?
And it's interesting. It's actually, I think, the 35 to 54, because among women as well, while it's not quite as intense as men, women 35 to 64 feel far more powerless than women younger or older as well. So I would put more on the demographic than on the gender of this. And I think that, the questions of affordability, the questions of home buying, the implications on family formation, a number of those day-to-day issues that really have Canadians frustrated at this stage of life. The Canadian promise that you had when you went to, graduated from high school, went to university, you did all the right things, and now you can't buy a house, and it seems impossible to get ahead. I think this really reflects that sort of an angst and a disconnect between the politicians not necessarily both hearing and putting forward solutions that are meaningful for those problems.
Well, to focus on the demographic, the report highlights Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Quebec are the provinces feeling this mostly. Do you think that this also goes with the fact that party leaders aren't really taking care of those communities' needs?
And interestingly, those are the three provinces which, without even looking at a poll, if I had to, if I asked you where is separatist sentiment highest in Canada, all of us would have identified those three as the most likely top three, for very different reasons in Quebec than perhaps Alberta and Saskatchewan. But certainly there has been a very public disconnect between those regions. And let's also take a look at those are three regions in which the governing party has not been particularly well represented. With the Bloc dominating Quebec and the Conservatives dominating Alberta, we've had a decade now in which they have effectively been disenfranchised to a significant, although different degrees. So that probably ties into it.
Well, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you for having me.